Okay, so obviously, the combat in World War I is mostly going to be made up of white men, but it's definitely important to recognize the contributions that a lot of our minorities in the United States made in World War I, because they were definitely very involved. I don't want you to think that they weren't. So the woman I have here on the slide is Jeannette Rankin, and Jeannette Rankin was the first woman to ever serve in the House of Representatives. She was actually the only person to vote no against declaring war. So women were very involved in the anti-war movement. That's usually how that works. Usually the anti-war movement is largely made up of women. Also during World War I, we've still got the women's suffrage movement going on. NASA initially stopped their peace, or they started peace initiatives in the beginning, and then once the United States actually declared war, then they were like, okay, well, let's support the war and support the United States. And when they did that, their membership actually doubled. NASA got a lot of members because a lot of people really respected how supportive of the war effort those women were. The National Women's Party, as you saw in the movie Our John Angels, which we watched in class, Alice Paul and those ladies don't put the fight for suffrage on hold. They continue to picket outside the White House every day, even when we are at war. So women are still fighting for the things that they want at home, but as men go head off to Europe, women are sort of keeping the country running in terms of the economy. And that's really how things have worked for quite some time. We've got women running ammunition factories and railroads, and they're serving as telegraph operators, and they're running farms and producing food for our soldiers. We've got women in the Red Cross. That's what this picture is here. On the left of the slide, we've got women serving in multiple capacities in the Red Cross. The last time we talked about the Red Cross was the Civil War, and back then it was women were mostly just serving as nurses. But by World War I, we've even got some women doctors and nurses and ambulance drivers. So women are a lot more involved with the Red Cross by the time we get to the late 1900s or the late 19-teens, I guess. African Americans are also very involved in the war effort, unlike they will in World War II. In World War II, the civil rights movement does not get put on hold. Civil rights leaders during World War II continue to push for civil rights progress and legislation even when we're at war. During World War I, they sort of put things on the back burner, sort of how NASA did. They put a lot of effort into supporting the war, unlike the NWP. So W.E.B. Du Bois, he actually spoke out as a supporter of the war. He said, if this is our country, then this is our war, and we need to fight for it and protect it the way that we see everyone else doing. So thousands of African Americans enlist in the military, and thousands more are drafted. They do fight in segregated units. So you see here on the right, I have a photograph of a black regiment in World War I. A total of close to 400,000 black men are going to serve in the armed forces during World War I, which is a pretty big number. Now, at home, African Americans are experiencing some changes as well. And this is the Great Migration. So from 1910 to 1920, we see 1.2 million African Americans leaving the South and moving north, a lot of them moving to cities like Chicago and Detroit. They're hoping to escape racism, and they're looking for more opportunities, better opportunities. Are they going to find this utopia of rainbows and equality? No, unfortunately they are not. Racism is not unique to the South in the early years of the 20th century. It is universal. It's all over the place. So even as they move to cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York, LA, Boston, Philly, everywhere they go, they are still going to be encountering people and discrimination. So unfortunately, that's going to keep happening. Mexican Americans are going to continue to play a very significant role in our history. We're going to keep seeing Mexican immigrants coming in from Mexico, same reasons why they would come to the United States today, hoping for a better life. So a lot of them move out west where they're going to work on ranches, in like Texas or California. Some of them will go home in between seasons. So like they might come and work on a ranch just during the harvest, and then when the season is over, go back to Mexico and then come back for the next harvest. But a lot of them, for the most part, will stay. We're going to see a lot of new Hispanic neighborhoods forming in Los Angeles, especially. LA is really, that's what this picture is here. At the bottom left East LA is going to see a huge number of Hispanic immigrants, and we're going to start to see a lot of those ethnic neighborhoods like we would see in cities like New York. They're going to start popping up in Los Angeles as well. So I told you before that the Western Front was the most important piece of the war, right? If you won the front, then you won the war. And the reason why the Western Front is so important, aside from that, is because it's really going to be the front in the war, because the Eastern Front doesn't last very long. The Eastern Front is the border between Russia and Germany, and the reason it doesn't last long is because Russia drops out of the war in early 1917, and that is because of the Bolshevik Revolution. So Russia has had a very long and complicated history of dealing with poverty and a government that doesn't really represent or work for its people. And at this time, the leader of Russia was called a Tsar, and the Tsar was of the Romanov family. And so we had a very small number of very wealthy people in Russia, and then pretty much everyone else was very poor and struggled a lot to make it and be successful, or really even to survive. And along comes a new guy named Vladimir Lenin, who I have here on the right. And he's offering change, and he's bringing about this new political ideology that says, you know, that all people can be successful, and if you give the government more power, then we can use the government in a more positive way, and we can use it to help people. And that idea is called communism. And when you're in such a desperate situation and someone comes along offering change, you're not really going to be very skeptical, because any change is a welcome change if you're in such a horrible situation. So Vladimir Lenin gets a lot of support pretty quickly, and his political party, these communists, they were called the Bolsheviks. So the Bolsheviks, they take power in Russia in March of 1917 by getting the Romanov family together for a portrait and then assassinating them all. So the Romanovs are out, and they overthrow the government. And so when Lenin takes power in March, he stops the fighting and pulls Russian troops away from the Eastern Front. So they will stop fighting Germany in March of 1917, but they won't actually sign their peace treaty until 1918, and that's the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. So Vladimir Lenin, I mean, he had a choice to make. You know, do you want to fight a war or a revolution? Because you can't really fight both at the same time. And he chose revolution, so he stopped fighting the war. Now, this is great for Germany, because now Germany can send all their men and their resources to the Western Front and focus there. And so now the Allies really need a new wave of help, because the Western Front is just going to be bombarded with more and more German troops all the time now they're leaving the Western Front. So Russia basically tags us in. That's when America gets involved, is a month after Russia drops out of the war. So American troops, I told you we declare war in April of 1917. It takes us a few months to mobilize, but we finally do land and arrive in France in June of 1917. And American troops are going to be under the command of this guy here on the right, General John J. Pershing. Pershing was an incredible military leader. If you're ever interested in military history, then I encourage you to Google him and learn more about him. He's really a very interesting and smart guy with a cool background. So American troops start arriving in much larger numbers, though, in 1918. The first arrived in 1917, but in 1918, that's when we really have huge numbers rolling in, and that's when the total of our 5 million troops are going to end up in Europe. And at that point, the German offensive is really starting to stall, because they're being constantly hit with wave after wave of American reinforcements. So the Allies see an opening here, and they're going to take it, and Germany's finally going to start to fall back. Now, American troops in World War I did have a nickname. They were nicknamed Doughboys, and that's mostly because they were fat. And I don't mean that they were actually fat. If you look at this photograph here of soldiers, they're not fat at all. But they are healthy. And compared to the French and British troops who have been fighting this war since 1914, they are definitely fatter, I guess, because they're essentially, these troops, a lot of them have been starving. They've been living in horrible conditions in these trenches for months on end, and it's just been a really difficult time. So we've got all these American troops coming in fresh-faced and willing to participate, and they look a little plump compared to everyone else, so they got the nickname Doughboys. So American troops are going to see most of their action in France, and most of that in the spring and summer of 1918. By the fall of 1918, it's very clear that Germany is collapsing. When the Doughboys arrive, Italy joins the Allies because they realize that they are going to lose. So at this point, the Allies have the upper hand, and Germany can't hold on much longer. So on November 11th of 1918, Germany finally surrenders. All in all, World War I ends with 5 million deaths for the Allied powers, 8 million deaths for the Central powers, and 6.5 civilian deaths. More civilian deaths than Allied combat deaths. So this is an incredibly deadly war. A whole generation of Europeans is essentially lost, and it's very difficult. So now, in order to truly say that the war is over, we've got to sign a peace treaty. So obviously we're going to go to Paris because that's the city of treaties and peace, apparently. So we go to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 to start working it out. And actually only the winners are allowed to attend. We don't allow the Germans or the Austrians and Hungarians to attend this peace conference. So President Woodrow Wilson represents the United States in this peace conference, and he makes his own peace plan called his 14 points. And his peace plan is basically about, he calls it peace without victory. His peace plan is more about peace and freedom and helping everyone get back on their feet and moving on from the situation, not about acquisitions and imperialism and giving all of these things to the people who were technically winners. One of the most important pieces of his 14 points was the creation of an intergovernmental organization called the League of Nations. And the League of Nations would basically serve as this global police force to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. Now, the Europeans had lost so much more in the war than we had. So Great Britain and France go to the Paris Peace Conference not wanting peace without victory, but wanting victory with punishment for the Germans. So the Allies do agree to the 14th point, which is the League of Nations, but they don't agree to the rest of it. And they want to really punish the Germans, especially they really blame the Germans a lot more than the Austro-Hungarians. So the Central powers are going to be split up, forced to pay reparations to all of the Allies. They're going to have a lot of their land taken away. They're going to have their military forced to be limited. They're going to be monitored much closely. They're going to lose all of their colonies and all of their territories. So we're really going to crack down hard on the countries who lost this war. So we write it up in the Treaty of Versailles, and Wilson comes home with it, and it has to pass in Congress, and people don't love it. Most Americans think that it's either too harsh, not harsh enough, or not harsh enough. They also think that it was, unfair that we left some countries out, like Germany. So we see these two groups forming in Congress. The irreconcilables, who oppose any treaty with the League of Nations. They don't want the League of Nations because they're worried that it will get us dragged into more of Europe's problems in the future. And then the other side are reservationists. Reservationists want to make some changes to the treaty because they don't love it, but nothing super significant. So it becomes clear that the treaty cannot be passed in the Senate because there are so many irreconcilables who hate the League of Nations. So we finally do pass the treaty, but we never join the League of Nations. We take that part out. Now, unfortunately, that's going to cause more problems than we could have possibly imagined. The true problem with the League of Nations will be that the United States isn't involved, because the person who comes up with this idea isn't even going to be there to sort of tell everyone in the League of Nations how it's supposed to work. So no one really knows how to do it, and they just sort of make it up as they go. And how harsh the Treaty of Versailles is, and all of this, really this entire Paris Peace Conference, this is the #1 cause for World War II, which we'll get into in Unit 4.